Vexthar stood on the platform and held the microphone, and his voice carried across the arena and beyond, through the broadcast systems. And he said, "I yield not from cowardice, and I yield from wisdom, and I have learned something today that the galaxy must know." The crowd's angry shouting quieted as curiosity took over. "I have fought for 7 cycles and defeated every challenger and killed many, and I believed myself invincible, and I was wrong," Vexthar said, "and today I faced a predator, unlike any I have encountered, and a predator that does not kill with venom or claws or overwhelming force." He gestured to Hyunwoo standing beside the platform. "Humans kill with time itself," Vexthar said, "and they are persistence predators, and they evolved to chase prey not for minutes but for hours, and not for hours but for days if necessary, and they never stop, and their bodies are designed to endure when others must rest." Murmuring spread through the crowd. "I am Kryn, and we are built for power and speed and short devastating combat, and my body is a weapon, and my species has conquered 17 worlds through strength," Vexithar continued. But against a human, I was prey, and I was the animal being hunted and run to exhaustion, and I lost not because I was weak, but because I am not built to fight an enemy who never stops." He paused and let the words sink in. Humans do not just hunt this way, and they wage war this way, and they pursue goals this way, and they live this way, Vexthar said, and his voice grew stronger, "and they have had wars lasting generations and conflicts lasting centuries, and they will sacrifice everything to achieve what they believe is important, and they are spreading across the galaxy now, and every species must understand what this means." The arena was silent now, and beings were listening intently. "I yield because fighting further would accomplish nothing except my death. And I yield because this human has shown me mercy twice and earned my respect, and I yield because the galaxy needs to hear this warning," Vexithar said, "and humans are not prey, and they are the apex persistence predators of Earth, and now they are here among the stars." He turned to Hyunwoo and said, "I declare, you champion of the Kolvar arena, and may you show others the same mercy you showed me." The arena master had no choice but to make it official, and he announced Hyunwoo as the new champion, and the crowd's reaction was mixed between cheers and angry protest. Hyunwoo stepped onto the platform and took the microphone when it was offered, and he looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I did not come here to make a statement about humanity," Hyunwoo said, "and I came here to win prize money for my sister's medical treatment, and I fought with respect for my opponent, and I am grateful for his wisdom and mercy in yielding." The crowd appreciated his humility. But Vexthar is correct about some things, Hyunwoo continued. "And humans are persistent, and we do not give up easily, and this is both our strength and our weakness, and we hope to use this trait to build friendships across the galaxy, and not just to wage war." He paused and made a decision. "I will donate half my prize winnings to establish a medical exchange program between Earth and other worlds," Hyunwoo said, "and so that beings from all species can share knowledge and help each other, and so that my sister's illness and others like it can be treated regardless of species or wealth." The crowd erupted in cheers, and this was unexpected and generous. Gia was crying in the stands, and she was proud and terrified and relieved all at once. The ceremony continued, and Hyunwoo was officially declared champion and received the prize, and medical teams escorted Vexthar to treatment, and the crowd slowly dispersed. Later that evening, Hyunwoo sat in his quarters and processed the transfer of prize money, and half went to his sister's treatment and half went to the medical exchange program he had promised, and he felt exhausted and satisfied. There was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Vexthar standing there, and the former champion looked better after treatment, and his scales had returned to their normal color, and his wounds were healing. "May I enter?" Vexithar asked. "Yes," Hyunwoo said and stepped aside. They sat and were quiet for a moment, and then Vexthar said, "I have been champion for 7 cycles and won hundreds of fights, and today was the first time I truly understood combat." "What do you mean?" Hyunwoo asked. "I thought combat was about strength and speed and skill, but you showed me it is about adaptation and endurance and knowing your own advantages," Vexithar said, "and you did not try to match my strength, and you used what makes humans unique. My friend Gia helped me understand your weaknesses. Hyunwoo admitted. The xenobiologist and I would like to meet her. Vexthar said. Hyunwoo contacted Jia, and she arrived quickly, and was surprised to see Vexithar. I owe you thanks, Vexithar said to her, and your knowledge helped your friend survive and also helped me learn. I am glad no one died today, Jia said carefully. I want to learn more about Earth and about humans, and about your world's other creatures. Vexthar said, and will you teach me? Jia's face lit up and she said, yes, and I would be honored. And so began an unlikely friendship between the former arena champion and the human xenobiologist, and Vexthar learned about Earth's ecosystems and the incredible diversity of life and the strange and beautiful adaptations that evolution had created. He was fascinated by persistence hunting and asked to see videos of humans tracking animals, and Jia showed him footage of the Sand people of the Kalahari hunting kudu, and the hunt lasted 8 hours in brutal heat, and the kudu eventually collapsed, and the hunters walked up calmly and finished it. This is how humans survived, Vexthar said with awe. Yes, and we were not the strongest or fastest, but we were the most determined. Jia said. Weeks passed. Hyunwoo retired from the arena and returned to Earth with enough money for his sister's treatment, and he became briefly famous as the human who defeated. The undefeated champion Vexthar did not return to fighting and instead became an advocate for human-alien cooperation, and he traveled to different worlds and spoke about what he had learned, and he warned against underestimating humans but also emphasized their capacity for mercy and cooperation. The story spread across 12 star systems and beyond, in arena halls and warrior academies. The fight was studied and analyzed, and a new respect for humans emerged, and beings stopped challenging humans to single combat, and those who had dismissed humanity as weak prey animals began to reconsider. On the Kryn homeworld, military strategists studied the fight and revised their assessments of human combat capabilities, and the word persistent appeared in their reports with new emphasis. On Earth, the story became legend, and parents told their children about Hyunwoo, who went to the stars and showed the galaxy what humans could do. The medical exchange program flourished and grew, and hundreds of beings from different species benefited from shared knowledge, and Hyunwoo's sister made a full recovery and lived a long, healthy life. Years later, a young alien student visited Earth as part of an exchange program and met Jia, who had become a professor of xenobiology, and the student asked, Professor, and is it true that humans once chased prey for days until it died from exhaustion? Jia smiled and said, Yes, and that is true. But you do not hunt that way anymore? The student asked. We still do, Jia said, and we just call it different things now. What things? The student asked, confused. Research, Jia said, and we pursue knowledge relentlessly, and we search for answers that take decades to find, and we never give up on unsolved problems. She continued, exploration, and we send probes to distant stars and plan missions that will take generations to complete, and we commit to them anyway. Justice, and we track criminals across star systems, and we pursue legal cases for years, if necessary, and we do not let crimes go unpunished. Medical research, and we fight diseases that kill millions, and we work for decades on cures, and we never stop even when progress is slow. The student was quiet and then said, So humans are still persistence hunters? Yes, Jia said, and we just hunt different prey now, and we hunt for knowledge and justice and solutions, and we are still the same species that walked across African plains tracking animals, and we still have the same determination. She walked to the window and looked up at the stars and continued, That is what Vexthar understood, and humans do not give up, and it is both our greatest strength and what makes us human, and we hope to use it to build a better galaxy for all species beyond the Kyr. Student looked up at the stars with her and understood. That night, the student wrote in their journal, and the entry ended with a sentence that would later become famous, and they wrote, I met a human today, and now I understand why Vexthar yielded. And humans are not dangerous because they are strong, and they are dangerous because they never stop. And that makes them the most patient and persistent predators the galaxy has ever known. The story of Hyunwoo and Vexthar became part of galactic history and a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and that mercy and wisdom are greater than pride, and that persistence is its own kind of power. On Convergence Prime, the Kolvar Arena still stood and new champions came and went but everyone remembered the day a human taught the galaxy a lesson about endurance and patience and the power of never giving up in a small apartment on Earth. Hyunwoo lived a quiet life, and he rarely spoke about his time as champion, and when his sister asked him the examination hall on Threshold 9 station smelled like fear and cleaning chemicals, a combination that never quite left the walls no matter how many times the maintenance drones scrubbed them down after another incident involving claws and blood and screaming. Students who thought they knew better than nature itself. Taemin stood at the back of the crowd, shorter than most of his classmates by at least a head, watching as instructor Velthar prepared the containment fields around 3 juvenile specimens that looked like nightmares had learned to walk on 4 legs and decided teeth were a good hobby to pursue with dedication. The rift claws were beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often are, their obsidian scales catching the artificial light like oil on water, their 6 eyes tracking movement, with the kind of focus that suggested they were always calculating distance and velocity, and how many seconds it would take to close the gap between hunger and satisfaction. Velthar had been teaching xenobiology for 900 years, which meant he had forgotten more about dangerous creatures than most species would ever learn in their entire evolutionary history, and his forearms moved with practiced efficiency as he adjusted the field settings while explaining in his clicking, whistling language that the translator implants rendered into something approximating bored condescension. The other students leaned forward with interest or leaned back with barely concealed terror depending on their species and personal relationship with common sense. But Taemin just watched quietly because that was what he always did, observing and learning and trying not to draw attention to the fact that he was human and therefore automatically considered either fascinating or irrelevant, depending on who was doing the considering. Humans had been part of the galactic community for only 70 years, which in cosmic terms was roughly equivalent to showing up at a party where everyone else had been friends for millennia and expecting them to care about your opinion on anything more important than what snacks to serve. And most species still thought of Earth as that cute little death world where everything was trying to kill everything else, and somehow intelligence had evolved anyway, like a cosmic joke that nobody quite understood. The punchline to the largest of the 3 Riftclaw cubs shifted its weight, and Taemin felt something tighten in his chest the way it always did when he watched predators move, because there was a language there that spoke directly to some ancient part of his brain that remembered when humans were not quite as dominant as they pretended to be. Now Velthar was explaining the dietary requirements of juvenile riftclaws when the containment field flickered once, twice, then failed completely with a sound like reality hiccuping, and the largest cub moved before anyone could process what was happening, because evolution had programmed it to recognize opportunity the way humans recognized faces. The creature crossed 3 meters in less than a second, which was impressive considering each of those meters contained screaming, students trying to remember if their flight response was supposed to involve actual running or just standing very still and hoping the universe would forget they existed. Velthar raised 2 of his arms in the standard warding gesture that was supposed to trigger instinctive submission in most predator species. But Riftclaws had apparently missed that particular memo about respecting the rules of interspecies interaction, and the cub's jaws closed around his lower mandible with a sound like metal crumpling. The instructor's scream cut through the chaos, a high-pitched whistle that the translators mercifully decided not to render into any understandable language, and his cybernetic enhancements sparked as they tried to compensate for the hydraulic pressure being applied to his jaw from multiple angles by teeth that had evolved specifically to hold struggling prey until it stopped having opinions about being eaten. Other instructors rushed forward with neural dampeners and containment nets, and students scattered like particles in a physics demonstration about panic. And somewhere, an alarm began shrieking in 3 different frequency ranges to ensure that everyone, regardless of their auditory biology, understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Taemin moved without thinking, which was possibly the stupidest thing he had done since arriving at the academy 6 months ago, with dreams of learning about the galaxy's incredible biodiversity and maybe not embarrassing his entire species in the process. He walked toward the Riftclaw cub the way someone might walk toward a friend's aggressive dog, calm and steady and projecting something that was not quite confidence but was definitely not the fear that was currently motivating everyone else to seek safety behind anything larger than themselves. His classmates shouted, "Warnings in 17 languages," and one of the instructors yelled something about protocol violations that would probably result in expulsion if he survived the next 30 seconds. But Taman was already too close to stop now, close enough to see the individual scales on the cub's neck and smell the copper tang of Veltar's blood and hear the wet grinding sound of jaw meeting bone. He made a noise low in his throat, something that came from the same place that told him when storms were coming or when someone was watching him from behind. A rumble that carried no words but meant something deeper than language about recognition and respect, and the understanding that existed between creatures who both knew what it meant to hunt. The Riftclaw's eyes, all 6 of them, swiveled toward him without releasing Veltar. And Taman made the noise again, deeper this time, and dropped into a crouch that lowered his center of gravity and somehow made him seem larger despite being objectively smaller. Because body language was funny that way, the cub's jaw muscles relaxed incrementally, then all at once, and Veltar collapsed as the pressure released. His cybernetics sparking and his breathing labored but alive. Definitely alive, which was more than anyone had expected 30 seconds ago. The Riftclaw turned its full attention to Taman now, abandoning its prey with the casual indifference of a creature that had decided something more interesting deserved its focus. And it approached him with its head slightly lowered in a posture that predators used when they were not quite sure whether they were greeting a rival or a potential pack member. Taman held still and let the creature circle him, feeling the displacement of air as that massive head came close enough to his throat that one wrong move would end this experiment in interspecies communication in the most permanent way possible. But his hindbrain was screaming information at him faster than his conscious mind could process, reading signals in the angle of the cub's spine, and the set of its shoulders, and the way its claws clicked against the floor in a rhythm that meant curiosity rather than aggression. The cub completed its circle and then did something that made every being in the examination hall forget how to breathe properly. It pressed its scaled flank against Taman's legs and lowered itself to the ground with its razor-sharp spine ridge flattening in a display that xenobiology textbooks clearly stated was impossible because Riftclaws did not submit to anything except larger Riftclaws, and even then only after extensive violence had established exactly who was entitled to eat first. Taman slowly reached down and placed his hand on the creature's head, feeling the heat radiating through the scales and the powerful muscles beneath that could tear him apart if they chose to, but they did not choose to. They chose instead to accept his touch the way a dog might accept affection from a trusted human, and the cub made a sound that was almost a purr if purrs came from creatures that massed 200 kilograms and could bite through titanium. The examination hall was silent except for Veltar's labored breathing and the quiet clicking of the Riftclaw's contentment, and Taman looked up to find every single person staring at him with expressions that ranged from shock to disbelief to the kind of existential confusion that came from watching reality casually violate its own rules right in front of you. Someone finally remembered to call medical services for Veltar, and someone else remembered to reactivate the containment fields around the other 2 cubs who were watching their sibling with what might have been envy, and Taman just stayed there with his hand on the Riftclaw's head, wondering if he had just discovered something important or just gotten incredibly lucky in a way that would never repeat itself. The cub pushed its head more firmly against his palm, demanding continued attention with the shameless entitlement of a predator who had decided that this particular human was acceptable, and Taman scratched behind what he assumed were ears because, honestly, he was making this up as he went along and hoping that universal mammalian behavior patterns applied to alien death machines. Director Kixvan arrived 7 minutes later, their crystalline body refracting the light into angry rainbow patterns that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day, and that someone was probably Taman. But right now, with a Riftclaw cub curled against him, like he had just invented the concept of domestication, Taman found he could not quite bring himself to care about bureaucratic consequences. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humans, and Taman suspected that learning was going to make a lot of species very uncomfortable. Very quickly. The containment suite was designed for specimens that needed isolation from the general population for reasons ranging from medical quarantine to being so aggressively territorial that putting them near anything else living resulted in carnage that required extensive paperwork. and Taman had been here for 6 hours with a rift claw, cub that refused to leave his side, like they had signed some kind of cosmic contract. In blood and instinct, the medical team had rushed Velthar to surgery, where they would spend the next 9 hours, reconstructing his jaw from fragments and cybernetic replacements, while he remained mercifully unconscious and therefore unable to contemplate how a creature he had handled dozens of times had decided his face was a chew toy, and the Academy administration had locked down the examination hall and begun reviewing every second of security footage to understand how a routine demonstration had transformed into an incident that would require updating 17 different safety protocols Director Kixvan had visited twice already, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that Taman's implant translated as varying degrees of administrative fury mixed with bureaucratic terror about liability insurance and whether humans should be immediately expelled from all xenobiology programs before someone else's jaw got rearranged. And Taman had answered their questions as honestly as possible, which basically amounted to saying he had no idea what he did and could not explain why the cub had responded to him, except that it just felt right in a way that transcended rational explanation. The Riftclaw cub, which Taman had started mentally calling Ash because its scales had that particular quality of light and shadow that reminded him of burned wood, was currently sprawled across his lap despite massing enough that his legs were going numb, and every time he tried to shift position, those 6 eyes would fix on him with such intense focus that he felt guilty for even considering disturbing the creature's comfort. Dr. Hyejin arrived during hour 7, carrying a data pad and wearing the expression of someone who had consumed too much caffeine substitute and not enough sleep while chasing an idea that had grabbed her brain and refused to let go, and she stopped just inside the containment field to stare at Taman and Ash with the kind of analytical intensity that made him feel like a specimen himself. She was human like him, one of only 15 at the academy, and she specialized in predator behavioral patterns, which meant she spent most of her time trying to explain to species who had never been prey animals why some creatures enjoyed hunting for reasons beyond simple nutrition, and her reputation for being brilliant was matched only by her reputation for being terrifyingly focused when she found a problem worth solving. She circled them slowly, and Ash tracked her movement with lazy interest but no aggression, which itself was apparently significant based on the way Hyejin's eyes widened, and she made notes on her datapad with quick stabbing motions. And after 3 complete circles she sat down, cross-legged just outside of claw range, and looked at Taman, with the expression of someone who had just solved an equation that everyone else thought was impossible. She asked him about his life on Earth before joining the academy. Questions that seemed random but followed some pattern only she understood, asking about pets and wild animals and whether he had ever worked with dangerous creatures. And Taman explained that he had grown up near mountains, where bears sometimes wandered into town and people learned to read their body language or risk finding out what several hundred kilograms of annoyed omnivore could do to human confidence. Hyejin made more notes, and then she asked about other incidents since arriving at the station, and Taman had to think back through 6 months of trying not to embarrass himself academically, to remember the handful of moments that had seemed odd, but not significant enough to report, like the territorial void fang that had charged him during a habitat observation, but stopped 3 meters away and just stared, before wandering off as if suddenly bored, or the razor wasp swarm that had diverted around his shuttle when it should have attacked anything that entered their claimed space. She pulled up his file and cross-referenced it with security logs, and her hands were shaking slightly, which Taman recognized as excitement rather than fear, because he had seen that look before on researchers who realized they had stumbled onto something bigger than they expected, and she showed him incident reports he had never filed, because he had assumed they were just coincidence or luck. 17 separate occasions over 6 months where dangerous predators had reacted to his presence in ways that violated their established behavioral patterns. Hyejin called in Minho and Yunji, the 2 other human students in the xenobiology program, and they arrived looking concerned, because being summoned to a containment suite was rarely good news, and Ash watched them enter with interest, but remained curled around Taman like he was a particularly comfortable piece of furniture that also provided warmth and safety. Minho was built like someone who had decided muscles were a good solution to most problems and had pursued that philosophy with dedication, and he specialized in combat behavioral studies, which meant he spent his time understanding how predators fought, so that colonists could avoid becoming statistics. And when Hyejin asked him whether he had experienced unusual interactions with dangerous specimens, he laughed, and admitted that his instructor had once commented that aggressive species seemed less interested in attacking him during practical exercises. Yunji was quiet in the way that made people forget she was there until she said something so insightful that everyone remembered why she had been accepted to the academy, despite human applications being viewed with skepticism, and she designed habitat containment systems that balanced species needs with safety requirements, and she mentioned almost casually that she had always found it easy to predict predator movement patterns because they made sense to her in a way that the textbooks seemed to overcomplicate. Hyejin listened to both of them and then pulled up her research, screens filling the air with data and graphs and behavioral analysis that she had been compiling for the past 7 hours. And she explained her hypothesis in the calm voice of someone who knew they were about to turn xenobiology on its head, and was trying very hard not to sound smug about it. Earth was a death world. Everyone knew that. A planet where evolution had decided that making everything dangerous was a fun experiment in biodiversity through violence, and most species that evolved on death worlds became either apex predators or extremely good at hiding, because those were the two options that did not end with extinction. But Earth had been different because it had dozens of apex predator species all competing in overlapping territories with prey species that had developed increasingly sophisticated defense mechanisms in an evolutionary arms race that had lasted millions of years. Humans had evolved not as pure predators or pure prey, but as something in between, omnivores who hunted but could also be hunted, who needed to understand both perspectives to survive, and that dual nature had created neurological adaptations that let them read predator body language instinctively, because failing to recognize threat displays meant getting eaten, while failing to recognize submission displays meant wasting energy fighting unnecessary battles. Other species in the galaxy had evolved along cleaner lines, predators who hunted and prey who fled, and their brains were optimized for one perspective or the other, but rarely both simultaneously, which meant they struggled to truly understand the mindset of creatures on the opposite side of the food chain. But humans had spent millions of years being both sides and had developed an intuitive grasp of predator psychology that was so natural they did not even realize it was unusual. More than that, Hyejin continued with growing excitement. Predators recognized humans as fellow hunters, even though humans were smaller and weaker than most galactic apex species, because recognition was not about size but about behavior and pheromones, and the subtle signals that predators use to identify others of their kind versus identifying prey. And humans moved like predators, and thought like predators, and smelled like predators, in ways that their conscious minds never registered, but that predator nervous systems absolutely did. She pulled up chemical analysis from the containment suite, showing pheromone markers in Taemin's sweat that matched compounds found in apex predator territorial marking, and brain scans showing that when he interacted with Ash, his neural activity mirrored patterns found in social predators establishing pack hierarchy, and genetic markers that suggested humans had inherited traits from their predator ancestry that remained active in ways that scientists had previously dismissed as evolutionary leftover with no current function. The implication was staggering. Humans were not just good at handling dangerous creatures through training and technology like other species, they were instinctively fluent in the language that predators spoke to each other, and creatures like Ash responded to Taemin not as a handler or a master, but as something their instincts recognized as kin, another predator who could be trusted because the deep genetic programming said so. 3 weeks after breaking instructor Velthar's jaw, Ash had grown 8 centimeters and gained 15 kilograms, which the xenobiology textbook said was impossible for juvenile rift claws in captivity, because stress supposedly stunted their development. But apparently nobody had informed Ash that bonding with a human was supposed to be stressful rather than the most comfortable situation he had ever experienced in his short violent life. Taemin had been allowed to continue his studies under conditions that involved more monitoring equipment than a military research facility, and enough bureaucratic oversight that he could not sneeze without 3 different committees requiring reports about the incident. But Director Kixvin had reluctantly agreed that expelling him would look bad after Hyejin's research had started circulating through xenobiology departments across the galaxy, and suddenly Everyone wanted to know more about humans and their apparently supernatural ability to make friends with creatures that most species studied from behind. Reinforced barriers. The other students gave Taman space that was probably equal parts respect and fear, walking in wide circles around him in the corridors like he carried some invisible field of danger that might activate without warning, and conversations would stop when he entered common areas, then resume in hushed tones after he left, which was lonely but also meant he got first choice of seating in the cafeteria, and nobody complained when Ash accompanied him to lectures, despite the regulations that clearly stated no uncontained predators in educational spaces. Ash had become his shadow, following him everywhere with the dedicated focus of a creature who had decided that this human was the center of his universe, and everything else was just background decoration. And the bond between them had deepened into something that Taman felt in his bones like a second heartbeat. Knowing where Ash was even when he could not see him, and sensing the cub's moods through some channel that bypassed rational explanation and went straight to instinct, Velthar had returned to teaching with his jaw, rebuilt from cybernetics and synthetic bone, the left side of his face now gleaming with metal that clicked when he spoke, and gave him a somewhat intimidating appearance that his students were too polite to mention, and in a development that surprised everyone, including himself. He had requested Taman as his research assistant for a project studying predator social cognition. They worked together in the lab 3 days a week, and Velthar would watch Taman interact with Ash with the intensity of someone who had spent 9 centuries thinking he understood predators, only to discover he had been missing an entire dimension of their behavior. And he asked questions constantly about human evolution and Earth ecology, and whether Taman understood how revolutionary his existence was for xenobiology. As a field, Taman tried to explain that he was not doing anything special, just responding to what felt natural. But Velthar insisted that natural was exactly what made it special, because no other species found predator behavior natural. They found it terrifying or fascinating but never comfortable, and watching Taman casually scratch Ash's chin while the Rift Claw made sounds of contentment was like watching someone have a conversation in a language that should not exist. The training sessions were where everything crystallized into something bigger than just one human and one Rift Claw, because Taman had started teaching Ash using methods he remembered from dog training videos he had watched as a kid. Positive reinforcement and play, and building trust through consistency, and Ash learned faster than any captive predator on record, picking up commands and behaviors and even complex problem-solving tasks that the textbook said were beyond Rift Claw cognitive capability. Hygen documented everything with the dedication of someone who knew she was watching history happen in real time, recording how Ash responded to verbal cues and hand signals and even subtle body language, how he learned to control his strength and retract his claws when playing with Taman, and how he would position himself protectively when other species approached. And her papers were being cited before they were even officially published, because the implications were spreading through the academic community like a fire through dry grass. The moment that changed everything came during a routine equipment inspection when a security drone malfunctioned and targeted Taman as a potential threat, its weapons charging with the mindless efficiency of a machine following corrupted programming. And Ash moved before anyone could react, placing himself between Taman and the drone, with his spine ridge fully extended and his jaws open in a threat display that made several observers remember why Rift Claws were considered apex predators. The drone's combat assessment algorithms must have recognized the danger, because it powered down immediately and requested emergency maintenance, and Ash held his defensive position until Taman placed a hand on his head and made a calming sound. And only then did the Rift Claw relax and return to his normal relaxed state. And security footage of the incident was shared so widely that it became a cultural reference point for human-predator bonding across 17 star systems. But success bred opposition, and Instructor Thexmore made his position clear during a faculty meeting that Taman only heard about secondhand because students were not supposed to know about administrative politics. And apparently Thexmore had lost family to a Rift Claw attack 30 years ago, and believed that trying to domesticate them was an insult to his dead relatives and a danger to the entire galaxy. Thexmore was Voxian, a species descended from herd prey animals, who had only survived long enough to develop intelligence because their homeworld's apex predators had been wiped out by an asteroid impact millions of years before they evolved, and he carried that prey instinct in his genes, and his culture and his bone-deep certainty that predators could not be trusted and humans who claimed otherwise were either lying or dangerously naive, he challenged Taman formally during a lecture on predator containment ethics, standing up in front of 200 students and 36 faculty members, and declaring that if humans truly understood predators, then Taman should be willing to prove it through a handler's proving, which was an ancient tradition from the early days of xenobiology when people still thought courage and skill could overcome knowledge of basic safety protocols. The challenge was simple in theory and suicidal in practice. Enter the specimen vault containing adult riftclaws without weapons or protective gear and emerge alive. And success would prove that humans deserved their growing reputation as master handlers, while failure would demonstrate that their abilities were exaggerated, and all humans should be restricted from working with dangerous specimens. Director Kixvan tried to refuse permission, but Thexmore had followed proper formal challenge procedures, and refusing would mean admitting that the Academy did not have confidence in its own students, and the political pressure from species who were uncomfortable with human capabilities meant that denying the challenge would be worse than allowing it. And so Taman found himself agreeing to something that everyone except apparently him understood was likely a death sentence. Hyejin was furious with a cold intensity that made her more terrifying than any predator, and she cornered Taman in the lab and explained in small words exactly how stupid he was being and how adult riftclaws were not cubs, and how even if his instincts worked perfectly, there were things in that vault that would kill him before his brain could process what was happening. And Taman listened and thanked her and told her he understood, but he was going to do it anyway because refusing would mean every human in xenobiology would spend their careers being questioned and doubted, and he refused to let his species' reputation be built on backing down. Minho offered to teach him combat awareness, not how to fight because fighting an adult riftclaw was a joke that ended with someone in pieces, but how to move efficiently and read attack patterns and position himself defensively. And they spent hours in training rooms while Minho barked instructions about weight distribution and peripheral vision, and not telegraphing his intentions through body language. And Taman learned and absorbed and tried not to think about the fact that all of this might be completely useless. Yunji helped him study the adult riftclaws through observation feeds, showing him territorial markers and submission displays, and the subtle hierarchies that existed within their social structure. And she explained in her quiet way that predators were not mindless killers but sophisticated social creatures with rules and expectations, and if he could demonstrate that he understood those rules, then maybe they would accept him as part of their world, rather than just prey that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The night before the trial, Taman could not sleep, and Ash seemed to sense his anxiety because the riftclaw pressed close against him with a warmth that was comforting despite the razor edges and the teeth, and Taman lay there, in the darkness, thinking about Earth and evolution, and the strange path that had brought him to this moment where his life would depend on millions of years of human development and whether those adaptations actually meant what Hyejin claimed they meant. The specimen vault was larger than Taman had expected from the observation feeds, a space designed to house creatures that needed room to establish territories and hierarchies without killing each other immediately. And the air inside smelled like musk and old blood and something else that his hindbrain recognized as danger, even before his conscious mind processed why. 3 adult riftclaws occupied the space, each massing over 400 kilograms of muscle and scales and teeth that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting for the specific purpose of killing things efficiently, and they turned as one when the entrance sealed. Behind him, with a sound that felt very final and very permanent, amphitheater viewing screens showed his position to hundreds of beings who had paid substantial amounts to watch either his triumph or his death, and Taman tried not to think about the fact that most of them were probably hoping for death because that would make for better entertainment and better stories to tell later about the foolish human who thought he understood predators. Ash's distress vocalizations echoed through the containment area from his secured platform, a sound like tearing metal that conveyed exactly how the young riftclaw felt about his human walking into a space with 3 adults who could end him in seconds, and Taman felt that distress in his chest like a physical pressure, but forced himself to focus because losing concentration now would be catastrophically bad for his continued existence. The first riftclaw charged before he had taken 5 steps, a test that apex predators use to measure threats by watching how potential rivals responded to aggression. And every instinct that evolution had programmed into prey species was screaming at Taman to run, but he knew with absolute certainty that running would mark him as food, and food did not leave this vault alive. Dropped into a crouch that lowered his center of gravity and somehow made his frame seem larger, a trick that human ancestors had used against predators for millions of years. And he made eye contact with those 6 glowing eyes and released a sound from deep in his chest that was not quite a growl but carried the same meaning about standing ground and refusing to back down. The riftclaw stopped 3 meters away, its claws scoring deep gouges in the floor as it braked, and Taman could see the confusion in its posture because prey ran and rivals fought, but this small creature did neither. It just stood there making predator sounds and projecting challenge like it had any right to claim space in this territory. Taman held the eye contact and slowly, deliberately advanced 1 step, claiming the space the rift claw had just occupied, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs hard enough that he wondered if the predators could hear it. But his body language remained steady because showing fear now would undo everything. The rift claw's spine ridge flattened slightly, a millimeter at most, but enough to signal that it was reconsidering its initial threat assessment. And then it did something that made the amphitheater gasp collectively. It broke eye contact first and turned its head aside in the universal predator gesture that meant acknowledgement of position without necessarily meaning submission. Taman released the breath he had been holding and continued moving with the same steady confidence, not aggressive but absolutely refusing to show uncertainty. And the first rift claw backed up another step and then moved aside, ceding space in a way that acknowledged him as something other than prey. The second and third rift claws approached from different angles, working together the way pack predators did when assessing new variables in their territory. And Taman was suddenly grateful for Minho's training about peripheral vision and situational awareness, because keeping track of 2 adult rift claws simultaneously was significantly harder than the training simulations had suggested. They circled him in a pattern that was clearly coordinated, testing his reactions and his awareness, and Taman mirrored their movements, turning to keep both in his field of vision while maintaining the confident posture that said he belonged here and was not concerned about their presence even though his internal organs were trying to evacuate his body through sheer anxiety. The larger of the two, a female based on the pattern of scales on her neck, moved closer with her head slightly lowered, and Taman recognized the body language from Yunji's briefings. This was the alpha testing whether he understood the rules of pack hierarchy or whether he was just a clever prey animal that had learned to mimic predator behavior without understanding what it meant. He met her approach by holding his ground and making that deep rumbling sound again, but this time he added a slight dip of his own head. Not submission, but acknowledgement. The gesture that one predator gave another to say, "I see you and I respect your position, and I am not challenging you, but I am also not prey." And the entire exchange happened in seconds but felt like hours. The alpha female stopped just within reach of his hand, close enough that he could smell the mineral scent of her scales and see the old scars on her muzzle from past fights, and her 6 eyes studied him with an intelligence that was easy to forget about when predators were safely behind containment fields, but impossible to ignore when they were right here deciding whether you deserved to continue existing. Taman slowly raised his hand, moving with the kind of deliberate care that he had learned from watching Ash respond to sudden movements. And he reached toward her muzzle while every survival instinct his ancestors had developed was screaming about how this was a terrible idea, and he was about to lose important body parts. His fingers touched scaled skin that was surprisingly warm, and the alpha female went completely still, her breathing pausing for a heartbeat. And Taman could feel the coiled power in her muscles and knew that if she decided this was unacceptable, he would not have time to regret his choice. But she did not bite, did not strike, did not do any of the things that xenobiology textbooks said rift claws always did when something touched their face without permission. Instead, she leaned into his touch the way Ash did, and then in a moment that Taman knew would be replayed across the galaxy for years, she deliberately laid down and rolled slightly to expose her throat. The amphitheater erupted in sounds that represented shock and disbelief and fundamental confusion across 17 different species, because throat exposure was the ultimate submission display in predator hierarchies, the gesture that meant I acknowledge your dominance and I trust you not to kill me. and adult Rift Claws did not do this for anyone except other Rift Claws who had proven superiority through combat. Taman placed his hand on her throat, feeling the pulse of her massive heart under scales that could deflect most weapons, and he made a soft sound that was meant to be reassuring, and the alpha female's eyes half closed, in what might have been contentment or might have been her own confusion about why she was accepting this from a creature that should, by all logic, be her next meal. The other two Rift Claws watched this interaction with visible uncertainty, their body language shifting from aggressive to curious, and Taman took a calculated risk and gestured for them to approach, using the same hand signal he used with Ash to call him closer. They came slowly and carefully, and Taman spent the next hour in the vault doing something that xenobiology professors would spend decades analyzing. He moved among the three adult Rift Claws, building trust through patient interaction and reading their signals and responding appropriately. And they accepted him not as prey or master, but as something that their instincts recognized as pack. He learned their individual personalities. The first male who had charged him was bold and testing boundaries constantly. The second male was more cautious and preferred to observe before committing, and the alpha female was intelligent in ways that went beyond instinct, watching him with eyes that seemed to calculate and consider, and ultimately decide that he was acceptable. When the vault entrance opened to signal the end of the trial, Taman had all three adults lying in a loose circle around him, and Ash was released from his platform and bounded across the space to join his human, and the adults accepted the juvenile without aggression, and Taman sat there surrounded by four Rift Claws, wondering if anyone would believe this had actually happened. Thexmore stood in the viewing area, looking like someone had just explained to him that mathematics no longer worked, and Director Kixfin's crystalline form was refracting light in patterns that might have indicated administrative approval or might have indicated a complete inability to process what they had just witnessed. Taman walked out of the vault with all four Rift Claws, following him in a formation that zoologists would later describe as pack behavior, not as master and pets, but as a group that had accepted him as one of their own. And the amphitheater was silent except for the clicking of recording devices and the sound of hundreds of beings trying to reconcile what they had just seen with everything they thought they knew about predator behavior. Heejin was crying, which Taman had not expected because she was normally so composed, and Minho looked proud in the way that warriors recognize courage even when the specifics were outside their expertise. And Yunji just smiled, that quiet smile that meant she had known all along that understanding was more powerful than force.